doing, you do not understand now, but you will understand later." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "Unless I wash, you will have no inheritance with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Master, then not only my feet, but my hands and head as well." Jesus said to him, "Whoever has bathed has no need except to have his feet washed, for he is clean all over. So you are clean, but not all." For he knew who would betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." So when he had washed their feet and put his garments back on and reclined at table again, he said to them, "Do you realize what I have done for you? You call me teacher and master, and rightly so, for indeed I am. If I, therefore, the master and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet. I have given you a model to follow, so that as I have done for you, you should also do." The Gospel of the Lord. Back in 2018, my wife, Nori, and I were visiting St. Louis prior to moving here the following year. I grew up in this area across the river in Alton, and we were looking to relocate here from Massachusetts, where we had been living. So we were here in the summer of 2018, visiting my mother over in Alton and doing some sightseeing in St. Louis. One of our first stops was the Cathedral Basilica, and as we were walking around inside, taking in all the majestic grandeur of the cathedral, my wife happened to pick up a copy of the St. Louis Review. Well, we finished touring the cathedral, we got in our rental car, and as we were driving along on the highway, Nori starts laughing at something she's reading in the review. "You need to look at this," she said, to which I replied, "Well, not while I'm driving on the highway." Once I got off the highway and I was at a stop, I did look at the item in the review that had provoked her amusement, and immediately I too started laughing with a mixture of amusement and a little bit of disbelief. The source of our laughter was an article about a recent ordination of deacons for the Archdiocese. And above a picture of then Archbishop Carlson laying his hands on one of the ordinandi was a headline. The headline was supposed to be a quotation of Jesus' words from Mark 10:45, in which he says that the Son of Man did not come, quote, "to be served, but to serve." Unfortunately, whoever wrote the headline reversed the words, and in big, bold letters above the Archbishop laying his hands on a newly ordained deacon, the headline read, "Not to serve, but to be served." Oops. Well, this typo went viral in the world of Catholic social media, and many people were amused by this unfortunate mistake. Now, I'm no psychoanalyst, and I'm not about to attribute any kind of sinister subconscious motives to whoever wrote that headline, but in the years since that article appeared, I've often wondered how many of us, whether consciously or unconsciously, approach life either with the attitude that Jesus had, not to be served but to serve, or with the attitude embodied in that regrettable typo in our archdiocesan newspaper, not to serve, but to be served. Because of our fallen human nature, it is very easy for us to fall into selfishness. Very easy for us to think of ourselves as the center of the universe, around which everything else revolves. But Jesus, who came to elevate our fallen nature and redeem it, offered us a powerful example to imitate, one of self-emptying, sacrificial service. We see that example of Jesus on full display in the gospel passage that I just read. This is a passage that we hear every year on one of the most important evenings of our liturgical year, namely Holy Thursday. At the evening Mass of the Lord's Supper on Holy Thursday, we recall the final meal that Jesus shared with his disciples. We recall how he instituted the sacrament of the Eucharist, the sacrament which represents his saving death on Calvary, the sacrament of his real presence which we are able to behold right here and now on this altar, the real presence of Jesus whom we have come to worship and adore this evening. Holy Thursday also recalls how, during the course of the meal in which Jesus gave us the sacrament of his body and blood, he also gave us a mandate to love one another as he loves us, and to express that love in concrete acts of service. This mandate to love and serve one another in Latin is mandatum, from which we get the name that is sometimes applied to Holy Thursday, Maundy Thursday. The Eucharist and the mandatum. These two realities which Jesus gave us at the Last Supper are in fact very intimately connected, and in a few moments I will reflect on that connection. But first, I want to draw our attention again to the radical, shocking nature of what Jesus was doing when he washed his disciples' feet. In Jesus' time, people did not wear socks, and they did not wear the kind of shoes that many of us wear today, which completely cover and protect our feet. They wore sandals, and their feet became extremely dirty from walking in those sandals on dusty and muddy roads. A common gesture of courtesy and hospitality when welcoming a visitor to one's home was to wash that person's feet. But this job was never done by the head of the household or any other member of the family. This menial task, this frankly rather disgusting task, was the job of servants and slaves. It was unheard of for the head of a household, or in the case of Jesus, for the master of a group of disciples, to do this kind of work. Knowing this helps us to understand why Peter objects so strenuously when Jesus begins washing the feet of his disciples. Jesus is totally going against societal protocol, but his action had powerful symbolic significance, and that on two levels. First of all, by washing his disciples' feet, Jesus is acting out for them the meaning of his incarnation, his taking on of human flesh, and his impending death on the cross. Jesus is emptying himself. Some years later, St. Paul would include a beautiful hymn in his letter to the Philippians in which he speaks of this self-emptying of Jesus. Though he was in the form of God, Paul wrote, Jesus did not regard equality with God as something to be clung to. Rather, Paul says, he emptied himself, taking on the form of a slave, coming to us in human likeness, and found human in appearance, he humbled himself further and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. By washing his disciples' feet, by taking it upon himself to do the work that only a slave would do, Jesus is visually acting out the very meaning of his incarnation and his death. He became a slave so as to set us free from our slavery to sin and death and the devil. That's one level of significance in Jesus washing his disciples' feet. The other level becomes clear in what Jesus says to his disciples after he washes their feet. He says, "You call me teacher and master, and rightly so, for indeed I am. If I, therefore, the teacher and master, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. I have given you a model to follow, so that as I have done for you, you also should do." In other words, in our dealings with one another, in our homes, in our workplaces, in our lives as members of the church, we are to imitate our Lord's self-emptying, his example of sacrificial service. We are to view everyone in the same way that Jesus viewed his disciples, as recipients of our loving service. That means if we are married, we are to see ourselves as a servant to our spouse. If we are parents, we are to see ourselves as servants of our children. If we are teachers, we are to see ourselves as servants of our students. If we are employers, we are to see ourselves as servants of our employees. In all of these cases, to paraphrase St. Peter from the letter he wrote, 1 Peter 5, verse 3, not lording it over them, but being examples to them. St. Peter, who so strenuously objected when Jesus first approached him to wash his feet, clearly later learned the lesson that Jesus was trying to teach. In that same letter, in 1 Peter 4, verse 7, Peter says to the Christians to whom he is writing, as each one of us has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Every single one of us in this church tonight has some kind of gift that God has given us. How are we using those gifts in his service? How might God be further calling us to use those gifts? How might God be calling us to participate in the work of evangelization, in the work of service to this parish community? I know that here at St. Clare there are many opportunities to put the words of Jesus into practice. As I have done for you, so you should also do. As well as those words of St. Peter, as each one of us has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's grace. It might be that the Lord is calling you to participate in some of the many forms of service and ministry that are available here at St. Clare, forms of service that will be highlighted in the parish ministry fair in the coming weeks. It might be that the Lord is calling you to take part in The Search, the ongoing video series which offers reflections on the purpose of our lives and our place in God's plan. How is the Lord calling each of us to imitate his example of sacrificial love by using our gifts in his service? As we worship our Eucharistic Lord tonight, as we abide in his holy presence, we might reflect on these questions. And there is no better place to reflect on how Jesus is calling us to serve him than by spending time in prayer and silence before the Blessed Sacrament. For service that is not undergirded by prayer and adoration is simply not something that can be sustained. Some of the greatest exemplars of modern sacrificial service in the church, like Mother Teresa and Dorothy Day, knew this very well. Mother Teresa required all the sisters in her community to spend an hour in Eucharistic adoration before heading out into the streets of Calcutta to serve the poor. And Dorothy Day, the founder of the Catholic Worker Movement, who worked so tirelessly to serve the poor here in the United States, also was a tireless practitioner of a daily holy hour and a faithful attendee of daily Mass. These holy women knew that sanctity and service go hand in hand. If we don't have our vertical relationship, our relationship with God, rightly ordered, none of our horizontal relationships, our relationships with other people, will be rightly ordered. And so, to remind us of that, on the night of the Last Supper, Jesus did two things. He instituted the Eucharist, and he gave us the mandatum. He instituted the Eucharist so that we could be strengthened by this most holy sacrament, strengthened by receiving Holy Communion at Mass, and strengthened by spending time in Eucharistic adoration, so as to then go out and offer sacrificial love to our brothers and sisters. Sanctity and service, the Eucharist and the mandatum, go hand in hand. Do this in memory of me, Jesus said, and then, as I have done for you, you should also do. God forever and ever. Blessed be God,